Here's the solution to Day 2, Problem 1. In question A, identify the slope and y-intercept for the graph of this linear equation. And then in Part B, we are going to graph that linear equation by drawing a line on this grid. So let's start with question A. And the first thing we're asked to figure out is the slope, also called rate of change, for this relationship. So what we're asked is, how is the value of y changing as the value of x changes? And one way to find this answer is to actually figure out some values of x and y, and then just look to see how they're changing. So one value that's helpful to figure out is, what is the value of y when the value of x is 0? And so I'm putting a 0 into this equation where the variable x is located. And then just figure out what this makes. 2/3 times 0 is 0. Add 1 is 1. And so I figured out that when x is 0, y is 1. But how do they change? So let's change the value of x from 0 to 1. That is, let's increase x by 1 unit and see what will happen to y. So y equals 2/3, parenthesis, and this time put in a 1 where the variable x is, and plus 1, and let's see what this makes. So 2/3 times 1 is 2/3, and 2/3 plus 1 creates a mixed number, 1 and 2/3. Okay. So what's happened here? When x has changed from 0 to 1, meaning when x has increased 1 unit, the y value changed from a positive 1 to a positive 1 and 2/3. It has increased by 2/3, and we can write that down as a rate. Okay. So the y value has changed by 2/3 when the x value increased by 1 unit, and that creates the ratio of 2/3 compares to 1. Now this does simplify. Just any number, or even a fraction like this, over 1 could just be written as 2/3. And so here is our slope for the graph of this equation. Now the other thing we're asked is, what is the y-intercept of the graph of the equation? The y-intercept is the dot on the y-axis line where the graph is going to pass through. And any dot on the y-axis line will have as its x-coordinate a 0. And so we can find the y-intercept by putting a 0 for the letter x in the equation and then figuring out what we get as a result. And in fact, we've already done that. The very first work step we did, we had filled in a 0 for x and figured out that y was 1. And so the y-intercept is 1. As an ordered pair, we could write this as 0, 1. When x is 0, y is 1. So here is our y-intercept. So we figured out the slope of our line is 2/3, or another way to think of it, the y changes by 2/3 when the x changes by 1. And we've also figured out the y-intercept dot. So in question B, we can use that information to graph the equation. Let's start with the y-intercept dot, 0, 1. Here's the origin. Put a dot at 0, 1. That's just up to the 1, and here's the dot. Now we're going to use our slope to find another dot. Slope is rate of change, explaining how it changes from one dot to another on a line. Okay. The y value will increase 2/3 every time the x value increases by 1. Let's do that. Let's increase the x by 1. One spot to the right. Now let's increase the y value by 2/3. Okay. 2/3 is not all the way up to the next grid square. That would be 1 full unit. 2/3 is a fractional amount of the way up, maybe about right here. We could find even another dot on the line. If we increase x by 1, hop just to the right 1 square, then we could go up 2/3. Going to here is 1/3, that remaining amount that was left right here. And then going up a little bit above there is that other 1/3, which is 2/3. So here's another dot on the line. We could find even one more dot. If we increase x by 1, hopping to here, and then go up 2/3, it takes me to here. And so here's another dot. And with all these dots on the line, that's certainly enough to draw a straight line through. Now in day 2, problem 2, it says, the table shows how much money Ava has saved. Assume the relationship between the two quantities is linear. Find and interpret the rate of change and initial value. Let's start with rate of change. This is asking, how is the value of y changing as the value of x changes? Or in terms of this problem, how is Ava's money saved changing as the number of months changes? We're going to find this by looking at the rows in the table, and we can look at any rows we want to. For instance, we could look at this row and this row. From 5 to 6, 1 month has gone by. And in that 1 month, her money has gone from $250 to $275. It has increased by $25, and we can write these numbers as a rate. So the y value increased $25 when or as 1 month went by. And another way to write this is $25 per month. Next, let's find the initial value. How much money did Ava have already to begin with before she starts this new savings plan where she's trying to increase her money by $25 per month? So the initial value is asking, what's that number in the second column of the table if the number in the first column of the table was 0? But unfortunately, the table doesn't begin with 0. It begins in the 3rd month. So we have to work backwards until we get to the row of the table where there would be a 0. Okay? So here's what we know already from the first row of the table. In the 3rd month of saving, she has $200. We can work backwards from there. Let's figure out what she had after only 2 months of saving. Okay? The key to this is the rate of change. She's increasing her money by $25 per month. So what did she have before? And then when she increased by 25, she ended up with $200. So 200 subtract 25 is $175. Now let's find what she had in the first month. 175 subtract 25 is 150. And then what about the 0th month? That is when she started, the initial value. 150 subtract 25 is $125. So her initial value was $125, and her rate of change is $25 per month.